Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Jonathan Ferro, along with Lisa Abramowitz and Anne-Marie Hordern. Join us each day for insight from the best in markets, economics and geopolitics. From our global headquarters in New York City, we are live on Bloomberg Television weekday mornings from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify or anywhere else you listen. And as always, on the Bloomberg Terminal and the Bloomberg Business app. We begin this hour with stocks extending their sell-off as President Donald Trump's push to take control of Greenland is sending fresh volatility into markets worldwide. The IBM Vice Chairman and former NEC Director Gary Cohn joins us now for more. Gary, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You heard the way we opened the programme. There seemed to be a concrete ideology when you were alongside the President in his first term. Well, how would you describe this moment? What is this all about?
No one knows for sure. But I think what we've seen evolve in the Trump presidency is this desire to negotiate and get a deal. So ultimately, is Greenland all about getting a deal? We know that the North Atlantic is becoming much more of a sought-after territory from a militaristic standpoint. So I understand the president's concern to have a military presence and protection of the North Atlantic. As if we want to expand our air defenses, Greenland is a pretty strategic spot. So I understand what the president's interest is. They also have rare earths, which is something that we in the United States can't supply to ourselves. So the question is this a negotiating posture to get a deal with Greenland, to get more rare earths, to get a larger naval and air force presence? And it may be. It does seem like that's on the table, and this may all evolve in a place where the United States ends up in a very good strategic position.
Do you think that's the way the business world sees it, coming into the World Economic Forum this week?
I think the business world's split on it. You've obviously got a European presence here and a U.S. presence here. I think the U.S. presence is a little bit more optimistic that this is going to end in the right place, and we've seen this before. I think the European contingency is a little more leery and say, look, maybe you're confident this ends well. We don't like being in the middle of this right now.
Which is a reason why in European hours, treasuries are selling off much more. The dollar was much lower. And as the U.S. wakes up, people are coming in and buying it. How much is the Sell America trade real, and how much is it a perception based on these moments, the ones that we saw on Liberation Day?
Look, there is some Sell America going on right now. I've met with a couple different asset managers this morning, said that global funds are reallocating a little bit out of the United States. So you see that, interest rates are higher, so people selling bonds, rates go higher. People are repatriating currency back home. They're selling dollars to buy local currency. They're selling stock market. They've got to repatriate currency. So I think we're seeing a little bit of that. I don't think that's what's driving the overall market right now. It doesn't feel like we've got to liquidate America. It feels like we've got to trim around the edges in asset allocation models going on.
This goes back to the wrestling match we were describing. AI on one side, you've got politics on the other, and they're facing off, and it's sort of Sell America until AI rears its head and gets to the lead, and that's what we're doing. And it's
Sell America until the light turns green and everyone has to buy America again.
Right.
Because in the real reality, if you look at the U.S. economy and what's going on, we've got one of the strongest economies in the world today. We're growing at 5+% growth. We've got a pretty good tailwind going on behind us. I mean, right now, the only thing stopping is all this geopolitical risk. If and when, and I say when, this geopolitical risk settles down, the market's probably going to take off again. That's been the history of this pattern.
Settles down. Gary, 2.5 weeks ago, we captured Nicolas Maduro. It feels like a decade ago. Now we're sitting in Davos talking about Greenland. You think geopolitics will settle down under a Trump administration?
2 weeks. Yeah, we're going to settle down. I think that there's a couple balls up in the air right now.
Well, a couple.
But, this too shall pass. Greenland. We can go back in the last 8, 12 years, and there's been periods of time where we've had these, highly volatile geopolitical moments. We're in a highly volatile geopolitical moment right now. And by the way, I'm not sure it's a coincidence that Davos is right in the middle.
All right, interesting. I want to ask you about the Fed chair race, because you were in the room with the president in Trump 1 when he decided to go for Jay Powell. What kind of questions do you think he's lobbing at these individuals? And in the end, who do you think it's going to come down to?
Look, the president's in an enviable position right now. He's got, what we know, he's got 4 really highly qualified candidates. Any one of those 4 could do a really good job in there. I think the president at this point is trying to understand the sort of mindset of the person he's going to put into the position. The president clearly has a view on what interest rate policy should be. The problem or the opportunity with the Fed job is once he appoints someone into that job, they're an independent agency, and he loses his day-to-day contact with that person. So I think the president learned in the first administration that it's very important to who he puts in that job, and that he should make sure that he's very comfortable with their policy mandate before he appoints them.
Do you think it's become even more important now that that individual needs to have the ability to persuade the rest of the committee in a way that maybe a few years ago that wasn't as relevant? There's just a sense on Wall Street that the president's approach in the last 12 months has galvanized the rest of the committee to dig in.
Look, I think the committee structure is going to be the committee structure. I'm not sure if the chairperson can ultimately sway the committee that far. Could they sway one vote or two votes potentially? But you've got some very strong regional bank presidents. You've got some very strong governors in the Fed. I think the Fed ultimately at the end of the day is going to be a tough group to persuade. I think they'll come out in the right place. I mean, historically, the Fed has done a very good job. Have they been a little bit late? Yeah, they were late in the transitory inflationary problem of COVID. But they've caught up. They've gotten to the right place. And I think if you look at the Fed through the cycle, they end up getting to the right place.
You were diplomatic about the four candidates. Can I just talk about some of them individually? Governor Chris Waller. You can too.
Yeah, you can.
Governor Chris Waller, I believe you were part of that process, right? Mm-hmm. Vice Chair Clarity, you were part of that process too. What was the president's approach to that process back then? Was he as involved as he appears to be now?
He was not as involved then, but remember, he was a first-term president who was an outsider to Washington. That was part of his mystique, as he was an outsider to Washington. He knew he had to put someone into the Fed chair's role, and he approached it. But I think now, understanding the importance of interest rate policy and understanding his view of interest rate policy, he's taking considerably more time talking to the various candidates.
I'll ask you the question that might get you in trouble. Is Kevin Walsh a chameleon? Is he a hawk? Is he a dove? Is he whatever it takes to get the job? Why didn't he get the job last time?
Look, Kevin is highly qualified.
Without a doubt.
Kevin has served in the Fed.
Without a doubt.
Kevin was there during some of the toughest days of the Fed during the financial crisis. I personally was dealing with Kevin on an hourly basis as we were trying to figure out what was going on in the United States financial system. Kevin was an active participant in the outcome that we all benefited from. And without Kevin's wisdom, I'm not sure we would have ended up in the same place. He's a highly qualified candidate.
It sounds like out of the four, that's who you'd like to see in the seat, based on that strong defense of Kevin Walsh.
I think Kevin Hassett's a great candidate. I worked with Kevin Hassett when I was in the White House. He was the CEA director.
Share your thoughts on Kevin Hassett.
Kevin Hassett was an excellent CEA director.
Let me tell you what some people say about Kevin Hassett, that if he's appointed, that's a puppet of the President of the United States. He'll sit there, smile, and do whatever it takes. Is that unfair?
You know, you and I both know, whoever gets appointed, there will be people that are disappointed and will have negative things to say about him. On the flip side, there will be people that will be very happy with whoever one of those four gets appointed. And if it's a fifth candidate we haven't seen yet, they'll be equally as happy with that one.
There is a sense that whoever's going to be there, they're going to cut rates. How much is the entire build-out of AI, which is what you spend most of your time talking about here, based on the idea that the Fed is going to be easing policy no matter what?
Like the AI build-out in rates, they're linked, but they're not inextricably linked. This AI build-out is being built because there's demand, there's forward demand, and the AI companies feel like they are behind the curve in being able to facilitate the needs of their clients. They are going to build these data centers. The only question that rates have is what is the ultimate all-in cost to build these things? And interest rates are going to be important. These are big, huge CapEx expenditures with 30-year lives. So, you know, the amount of interest you're going to pay to finance one of these centers is important. So 25 or 50 basis points has a lot to do with these decisions. But I will caution you, like I always do, the Fed only controls Fed funds. They control overnight rates. You've been talking all morning about the 10-year. The 10-year's at 4.30. Where these data centers are going to be financed, they're going to be financed to the medium, to the long, to the very long end of the curve. It's going to be a combination of duration. Fed funds is not going to affect that. So Fed funds could possibly go down, and the interest rate to finance a data center could be unchanged.
Do you miss the trading floor?
Of course you miss the trading floor.
Yeah, I get the feeling you miss the trading floor. Can you imagine imagine how scary things were back at Goldman back in the day?
But that's when
first year analyst, Gary's walking the trading floor.
Yeah, I think that he would have probably.
But John, that's when there really were trading floors. Right. Like you actually stood up and talked on phones and spoke to each other. And
did it prepare you for the West Wing?
Now it's machines. Now it's machines.
Did it prepare you for the West Wing?
It did. It did. It very much did.
In what way, Gary?
Just, I think the ability to be watching 5 different things going on at the same time and be listening in 5 places. People in the White House were always amazed that I could be like having a conversation over here and talking to someone behind me because I heard them talking. But when you grow up on a trading floor and you grow up in a trading environment, your eyes and ears have to see everything.
Stay with us. More Bloomberg surveillance coming up after this. Joining us now in Davos, Switzerland, Paul Ryan, the former House Speaker, and now Teneo, Vice Chair. Speaker Ryan, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
I had this question planned for a while. Does your party now have more in common with Senator Bernie Sanders than the 114th and 115th Congress that you oversaw?
Apparently in economics, maybe the case is right. On tariffs and on interest rate caps and things like that, perhaps. I'm a conservative. This is not conservative economics.
Is there space for that in your party now?
Yeah, there is. Our party is a Big Ten party. It's got a lot of different factions. The dominant faction right now is more of an economic populist faction. That's the president's faction. That's MAGA. I'm a conservative. I'm in the minority of my own party, but that happens.
When John's talking about having this relationship, say, the MAGA wing with Bernie Sanders, we're seeing that with a ton of issues the president's talking about, that the defense sector shouldn't have dividends or buybacks, credit card interest rate caps. Bernie Sanders literally wrote the bill. How do individuals in the minority of the Republican Party right now make their voices heard?
This is populism, but it's populism tethered to whatever people think is popular, not tethered to certain core principles like liberty, freedom, free enterprise, private property rights, et cetera, et cetera. So my wing of the party, which is the classical liberal conservative wing, the free market wing of the party, is in the minority. And we just had to make our case for why we believe what we believe and why we think people are better off at the end of the day. The challenge is it's hard to defeat populism and sound bites and emotion. And that's what can win the day. But it doesn't win the issue. It doesn't actually deliver the results. So at the end of the day, I think results are what matter. And I think people, voters, vote for results. If they're going to vote for populism that speaks to their concerns and their grievances and their frustrations, that's one thing. But if that populism doesn't deliver policies that actually solve problems, then they're going to look elsewhere, and hopefully we can have a better discussion about what actually works. What principles that built our country, that make our economy strong. It's our private property rights, our deep liquid capital markets, our rule of law. That's why America is America. That's why we've done so well. And we have to defend those principles, even if those principles aren't that popular.
You're a free market individual. This administration is taking equity stakes in companies. Is that state capitalism the way that Chinese do it, or say like the Europeans in the 70s?
Yeah, it's more of Europeans. It's more Japanese. It's more Europeans. It's not Chinese. It's not what conservatives are for. We don't believe in doing that. But this is more industrial policy, less communist dictatorship. It's very different.
Your role right now is to advise companies, and you're coming at a time where companies have no clue what's going on at the White House or what might come out of it. What do you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, we just did a survey, actually, of 750 CEOs that Teneo just did. And frankly, a lot of them are pretty optimistic about M&A. They're optimistic about economic growth. Where they're uncertain is tariffs. So they have to plan for resiliency. They're basically building resilient systems because they don't know what's going to happen on tariffs. I actually think, and I hope, that the Supreme Court may take away the IEEPA authority. I don't think that law was written for tariffs. It's a sanctions law. We'll find out. It may be even later today. I don't know when the court's going to rule. But that's a tool the president's been using far beyond Congress's intent. That's my opinion. But if that happens, then he'll have to go to other trade laws that aren't as easy to use, like the IEEPA laws have been used. And so that takes away some uncertainty. But we're going to have trade uncertainty, tariff uncertainty. But there's good regulatory posture. We have good tax policy. There's going to be a lot of M&A. So I think we're driving the car with 2 feet. We got 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake, and that's what CEOs are trying to plan for. How do they respond? How do they seize the opportunities and plan for the uncertainties?
We just had the head of General Atlantic on, who said that resilience to him means diversifying, and it means diversifying away from the United States. This is the what-if scenario. In the meantime, businesses have to plan. How much of the people you're talking to moving capital flows outside of the U.S. in a way that concerns you?
I worry about that. I worry more, frankly, about a long-term debt posture and the fact that we're not doing anything to deal with our debt, which means our dollar. So I think there are things that are good that are happening, say stable coins being deployed. That's good for the dollar. If we got our fiscal house in order, that'd be great for the dollar, but I don't see the populist politics lending itself to doing those things. But we do have the best economy in the world. We have the deepest, most liquid capital markets. So I still think we're going to be there. We have better regulations than what we had in the last administration. We have good tax policy, but there's a lot of uncertainty. So yeah, it bothers me when I hear companies feel they need to diversify away from America because of the uncertainty. But if we get this uncertainty dealt with, if the uncertainty tamps down, then I think we'll be back in business. So overall, I think we're going to be okay at the end of the day. I think our institutions stick.
Can we finish on the debt market? You took us there. There's a sell-off in today's session. Look, 4.30 on a 10-year bond yield is not a crisis. I'm not going to pretend it is. But the direction of travel is just to push more and push more. And it's not just America anymore. That's right. Maybe Japan is leaning in the same direction and they'll loosen things up as well. What do you think we're building up to?
What I worry about are auction failures. They won't technically be a failure because they'll make the primary dealers buy the paper. But I worry if we see that an auction would have failed, that what the spike in yields will look like, and then what that does to our fiscal policy. So if we could get ahead of our fiscal policy problems by reforming our entitlement programs prospectively for the X generation on down, I think we could calm the bond markets down and we could be the flight to quality again. We're not there and our politics aren't there yet. So because that's not even anywhere near being politically viable, you have these kinds of things. Then you have all this tariff uncertainty, all the things that are happening there that are going to spook the markets. I don't know if this is a Japan story today or if there's a Denmark. I don't know what this is about. But if we had our fiscal house in order, I don't think you'd see these kinds of shocks.
Stay with us. More Bloomberg surveillance coming up after this. The president threatening to impose additional tariffs on some European allies supporting Denmark while he pursues Greenland. The Finland president, Alexander Stubb, joins us now for more. Mr. President, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for always making some time for us. Look, I would never traditionally start a conversation like this with a head of state, but given the news flow and the headlines and the pictures of text we've seen over the past few days, I have to get a better understanding from you directly. I understand you were on an exchange with the President of the United States where the President almost explicitly linked his failure to win the Nobel Peace Prize with a more assertive stance on Greenland. Did that actually happen?
Well, yeah, I mean, we do message a lot with the president, and sometimes I message together with the Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre. So, yes, the response was as has been reported, and this is what frank diplomacy is all about. This is quite normal in our engagements behind the scenes, and it's good that we have these conversations.
You'll have to forgive me, but for many people, they don't feel that it's normal to connect the failure to win a prize with a more assertive stance over someone else's territory.
It is normal to have direct talks. Of course, on the Greenland issue, I disagree with the president. I think now what we need to do is to bring down the temperature. We need to find an off-ramp and probably create some kind of a process which will strengthen Arctic security. And sort of at the end of the tunnel, I wish we could have a NATO summit in Ankara where we all agree on a new Arctic security structure. I come from an Arctic country. I come from a country which has one of the biggest militaries in Europe. I come from a country which has the best know-how in Arctic defense. So these are the types of things that we need to work with the alliance, including the United States.
President Trump has been talking about Greenland since 2019. What makes it different this time? What does an off-ramp actually look like?
I think there's a short-term scenario here and there's a long-term. Short-term is to basically de-escalate the language, and I hope we'll see some of that here in Davos, here today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. And then the second one is a long-term strategic thinking on, okay, is this an issue of sovereignty or is it an issue of security? I hope that it is an issue of security, and then we start looking at how we can beef up security in the Arctic region. Now, the latest conversations that I've had about this subject in the past 2 to 3 hours, this is how fast things are changing in the new foreign policy world, gives me a little bit of hope that we'll find a way.
It feels like a live negotiation. The president, a lot of the time, does come out with something very aggressive to get to an endpoint, which really is just a better deal. I liken this to NATO. At one point, there was reports he wanted to pull out of NATO, but really at the end of the day, he wanted Europe to spend more. Is that how you view this, through that lens?
Well, first of all, the President of the United States has a capacity to deal with a multiplicity of issues at the same time. I mean, you only look at what's happened this year. Venezuela, Iran, Greenland, Gaza, the Peace Board, and many other things at the same time. And of course, add on to that domestic issues. On the NATO issue, if someone would have told me at the 75th anniversary of NATO in Washington, D.C. in 2024, I think it was, that we are looking at increasing our defense expenditure to 5% next year, I would say, please go and see a doctor or consult the Foreign Affairs magazine, because this is not going to happen. Now, if at the end of the day after this, what could be called rhetorical escalation, we come up with a stronger Arctic security, then that is good. And obviously, we are seeing foreign policy done in a slightly different way from what we're used to. But, I'm a Finn. I thought you'd ask the first question that, what do you do? I said, in these kinds of situations, you take a deep breath, you go in the sauna, and you take an ice bath. And that's what we're missing. That's what we're missing here.
I've been to your embassy sauna where they have had diplomatic dealings done. It's quite a scene.
You could have the ice bath right there. Look, there is this question, Mr. President, about why European nations were sending more troops to Greenland over the past couple of days and the past week. At first, it was to beef up and show that they were serious about the security.
That's not what it was about at all.
Okay,
no.
so the way that it was taken by President Trump was to defend from the United States.
Yeah, I think there was probably a misunderstanding, or not probably, there was. So basically, let me explain. There is something called Arctic Endurance, which is basically a NATO training exercise. That exercise has 8 different components, all of which the United States is present. We were asked by our allies to go and do a reconnaissance mission to check out the territory, the landscape, and how it's going to work out. This is completely normal procedure. And obviously, I can't talk about the specifics of that exercise, but trust me, it is not trying to protect anything westbound. It's more eastbound.
At what point do you feel like you're just fielding calls because you're thought of as the Trump whisperer? I mean, what are you telling your colleagues in other European nations about how to deal with Mr. President?
Well, I think, diplomacy, a lot of times when people analyze diplomacy, they look at it on a state-to-state relations. What's the values, interests, power, culture, history, geography. But they forget that a lot of it is actually about person-to-person engagement. And the fact that I'm able to communicate directly with the president puts me as president of Finland into a good position. But I have no illusions about being a Trump whisperer. He's the president of the United States. He decides completely for himself. I throw out a couple of ideas. Sometimes he likes them, sometimes he doesn't. And then I throw ideas to our other European allies and friends. That's what diplomacy is about.
When did you last speak?
We spoke, it was a collective phone call, I think in Paris on the 5th of December or Berlin, I forget when it was. But we
with
do
the
message.
president?
Yeah, but that was sort of a collective.
And the last message with each other was in the last few hours?
I think it's been made public.
That was the last time you spoke? That's the last time you messaged?
That's the time we messaged, yes.
The reason I ask this is I'm trying to gauge whether there was a misunderstanding. It certainly seems like you perceive there was a misunderstanding.
Well, my perception is that it was a misunderstanding. So now we need to, sit down, discuss, get an off-ramp, and at the end of the day, we need more Arctic security and with European and American presence.
This is clearly played out very publicly, and you've been transparent about how frank things are, often behind the scenes. But given how publicly this is played out, what kind of a message do you think this is sending to the Russians at the moment, the way this is playing out?
Well, anytime there is a diplomatic issue, to put it diplomatically, between us, the transatlantic partners, I'm sure that the Kremlin is enjoying it. I mean, and they will use it as they best can, as we saw, foreign minister of Russia, Lavrov, puts out a tweet and saying that for the US, Greenland is what Crimea is for Russia. And obviously, that's an insult. And we all understand that. So we always have to be careful with the Russians because they will use any moment and any possibility for good old information warfare and propaganda.
The unintended consequences is just creates more of a positive attitude towards Russia and China and divides the transatlantic relationship. How big of a concern is that? Especially after we just saw Mark Carney go over to Beijing and say they have this new strategic partnership.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm very pro-European, I'm very pro-American, and I'm a transatlanticist. So it is in my interest and also based on my values that we have a closer relationship with the United States. That's why I'm also very pragmatic. I understand that the United States is the number one superpower. And what we need to avoid, of course, is a certain disengagement. At the same time, I have to say that Europe needs to use this moment as well. It needs to beef up its defense. It needs to get stronger economically. And I think, my big thesis is that it's going to be the global South that decides the new world order. So that means that we need to engage more with the likes of India. I really liked the free trade agreement that the EU forged with Mercosur. And I think people will start looking a little bit elsewhere. But I really still want to contain and bring back the US as best we can.
On top of Russia, on that conversation, I've been told that discussions are going very well between the United States and Ukrainians, the United States and the Russians. Kirill Dmitriev reportedly is here having a conversation with Steve Witkoff today. How much longer do you think it will take to get that deal done? Do you think Putin even wants a deal?
Okay, so 2 observations on this. The first one is that I'm afraid that the Greenland issue will take all the oxygen here in Davos from the Ukraine dossier, which I still think is fundamentally important and acute. But the second point is good news. I think ever since Jared Kushner came into the game, actually in Geneva right after the G20 summit, and we had another meeting in Berlin and then in Paris, we have a lot of more practicality. So we basically have, depends on how you count, 6 documents or 2 plus 5 documents. The good news is that Ukraine, the United States, and the coalition of the willing or Europe, we're on the same page. The big question is, are the Russians? I'm quite skeptical about that. I think we might get a deal on security arrangements. We might get a deal on territory, certainly on the prosperity package. I'm quite hopeful that we'll get something here this week. But then the Russians will say niet.
Well, if Russia continues to drag the United States along, do you have a sense of what Trump's red line is with Putin?
I'm not going to start interpreting the red lines of the President of the United States, but I have to say that I really like what he did on Lukoil and Rosneft on the sanctions. And to be honest, I mean, Putin lied to President Trump about the drones hitting his dacha. They fired ballistic missiles, so this is something that certainly will shorten the fuse of the President of the United States. And it, of course, depends on how much carrot do you put before you hit with the big stick.
Just a final question. We often ask our guests for forecasts at the World Economic Forum. I'm not going to ask for a long-term one. Where do you think we'll be at the end of this week?
I think we will have defused the Greenland issue. I think we will have made progress on Ukraine. And I am 100% sure that the world will not be finished by then.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in markets, economics and geopolitics. You can watch the show live on Bloomberg TV weekday mornings from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify or anywhere else you listen. And as always, on the Bloomberg Terminal and the Bloomberg Business app.